Hello, and welcome to my spoiler review for Avatar: The Way of Water. Where to begin? It's such a long movie with so much going on. So this is what I came up with. This is the game plan for our discussion. All right, so I think we'll start with the two major story points, fathers and sons, and then also a strong anti-whaling message, which they managed to hide from the entire ad campaign for this movie. Yes, and by the way, I looked it up. They do still hunt whales in some parts of the world. I thought whaling was over. I thought we conquered that, but apparently, no. Also, we'll discuss how the movie basically becomes Titanic 2 in the third act. And then we'll take a look at the individual characters. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on the film down below, because I know so many of you went in skeptical as I did. Are you still skeptical, or are you now Team Avatar? And maybe you were always Team Avatar. Are you still? Because this movie is, I think, substantially different than the first one. All right, so fathers and sons. The big surprise, of course, is that we're not just talking about Jake's sons, but the reveal that Spider is actually Quaritch's son, who fell through the cracks when Quaritch was killed, and he was too young to travel back to Earth in cryosleep. I guess his mother just abandoned him and was like, good luck, kid, I'm out of here. I guess, Quaritch dated someone like himself. So Spider is left behind and raised by the remaining human scientists who were allowed to stay, who are, of course, quite different than Quaritch. Although, I think Spider's a lot like Quaritch, which we're going to discuss. There's always that argument. How much is nature versus nurture? So Spider is actually Miles Quaritch Jr., because when Quaritch realizes that's his son, he refers to him as Miles, which, of course, is his first name. He's like, Miles? And I liked that moment a lot. I thought that was great. I also feel that while Jake and Quaritch are mortal enemies, they're going to fight to the death for some reason. This sequel, there's no therapists on Pandora, or Human Resources Department, apparently. But this sequel highlights their similarities, I think. When I was watching this, like so many groups that fight in real life, which is quite tragic, I think people who have some distance from the situation, some perspective, are like, you're actually quite a lot alike. Because, they both take a military-style approach to raising their sons, and they make a lot of the same mistakes. So, that's I thought that was fascinating. We'll start with Jake and his two sons. So, by the way, Loak, totally responsible for his older brother's death. And I think everything happened so quickly, and we didn't really get to see that register. We saw it register for the parents in that very sad scene, which we'll talk about. But I think it's still registering for certainly Loak, right? Because he seemed to not take a lot of culpability for it. And I was like, as soon as Sully was like, you're going to get your brother killed, I was like, oh, he's dying. But I think I still think it worked as a story point. I think Avatar 3 will be a lot about Loak and the rest of his family coming to terms, not just with the death of the oldest child, but Loak's responsibility for that. That's tough to move on from. Loak is an interesting character because of this situation. His instincts are good. He does have good instincts. In the beginning of the movie, he saves his mother's life because he disobeyed his father's orders. His father told him to stay here and watch the banshees. And he was like, no, and he went, and he saved Neytiri's life. But he clearly needs to learn that when you gamble, you can lose as well as win. And they're playing a game with very high stakes, where life is at stake. And it's also very realistic in that gamblers who play fast and loose, the repercussions are often felt by those around them in close proximity until the gambler eventually takes themselves out. But, that's why you don't want to stand too close to a gambler. And Loak also is dealing with being an outcast, which is always a very compelling story point. So I think that's why the character also works so well. He's a half-breed, but also he's the son of a legend. I love the line, by the way, when he was talking to his new whale friend, when he was like, my father came from a star. And he said that so nonchalantly. And also I was like, that's actually true. That was such a cool idea. I was like, wow, what a neat idea. For Father's Day, slap that on a t-shirt. They wear t-shirts on Pandora. But I thought that was really great. And having to live up to that must be very challenging. And I think they're showing that. But I think also on the flip side, one of the few flaws of the Avatar movies is that while on paper, Jake Sully is super special, played by Sam Worthington, not so much. You're like, your dad's from a star. Can we meet him? And then Sam Worthington walks in and you're like, oh, he seems like everybody else. I'm actually a little less special. What star? Is it maybe one of the ones that's burning out? Actually, I think that's the whole reason they are leaving Earth, because it's a star that's not doing so hot. But yeah, I think that's a little bit of a casting flaw. I also like the line, though, speaking of a lot of great lines in this script. I hope this script gets the respect it deserves. But I like the line that Sullys stick together, and the acknowledgement that that is as much a flaw as it is a strength. I thought that was really great, because Quaritch, of course, is able to keep drawing them out by using their kids as bait. So also in my non-spoiler review, I compared Avatar 2 more to a streaming show than a movie, and I referenced Andor. But I thought about it, and another streaming show that I would reference is Ozark. This reminded me a lot of Ozark and the Bird family, and how these children are thrust into an adult life faster than they should be, and they have to operate in that adult world. And because they're involved in their parents' businesses, they have to make loyalty decisions. And it's a very interesting dynamic to have the family dynamic bleeding into the business, employer-employee dynamic, and, making power moves. But how do you make power moves when your family's involved? And in this case, children. So I thought that, they're making a lot of power moves over in succession, but at least those are all adults. So I thought, it reminded me a lot of Ozark, and in a very dangerous situation to boot. So it was great. And I love Ozark, as you know. So as for Quaritch and Spider, I really love exploring what it's like to be the child of a villain. This is rarely explored. And I found it particularly interesting because I happen to know someone who has, let's say, a very difficult parent. And I know how hard it was for this person to escape the pull of that bond, even though they knew that their parent was not a great person. And it wasn't even the parent themselves as an individual, but the bond. And wanting to have a parent, wanting to have someone who loves you, to have that connection. It was brutal to witness, and so I can only imagine what it's like to live it. So I understand that Spider is pulled towards his father, even though he knows his father is a horrible person. His father also is a very, in some circles, exemplary person. And so I think there's that pull too, that legacy that Spider maybe is drawn to. By the way, Spider should have told the Sullys that he saved their mortal enemy. When he came back after saving Quaritch and he was like, hey, everybody, can I come in for that hug? And I was like, I think you should mention that Quaritch is still out there, because they're all under the assumption that they got him. But I guess that means, and that's another way that Spider's a little bit like his dad. He's like, I got to look out for me. And I also thought it was great that Quaritch was proud of Spider, that he saw parts of himself in him. And I also, as I said, Spider feels like he has an anchor, that he belongs somewhere, that he has a legacy. That was just great stuff. And I like the fact that, at first Quaritch was like, I only have the memories of Quaritch, human Quaritch. I'm my own person. And then Neytiri called his bluff and threatened to kill Spider. And Quaritch wouldn't let it happen. And I thought that was a really beautiful, complex moment. I really liked it. All right, now let's talk about whaling. Quite a surprise. Again, totally out of the promotional materials. I think we saw some posters with a whale in it, but nobody knew these whales were like really smart whales. And to me, I thought that was a little step too far. You remember my comments about cows, how cows are extraordinarily stupid? Well, I know, and I think it's fascinating, and I wish more people realize this, that some animals are quite smart. Pigs, geniuses. They can open doors and escape from pens. It's very sad. And I think that, I wish that, again, that was something people were more aware of. But the idea that these space whales are as smart as humans, if not smarter, seemed a little bit of an overreach to me. I was like, really? It doesn't make sense that something so smart would not be able to leave their mark or to express that intellectualism. Like, Kate Winslet's character was like, my whale composed a symphony. And I was like, where is it? Maybe these whales are all just a bunch of posers and lying to the Metkayina. They're like, let's tell them we're all geniuses. Because I was like, they can't write down the symphony, and I haven't heard the symphony. I'm not like I'm hearing beautiful whale symphonies coming from out there, and I'm like, oh yeah, they repeated the one from yesterday. They must have composed that. So that was a little bit hard to buy. And then if that was true, I was like, how cruel to have that level of intelligence and be stuck in the body of a whale that has no opposable thumbs and can't express any of this genius. So it was a weird choice. But I do think that, but again, animals are very smart and you should respect animals. So I do, and it's interesting, you see these videos online, which I'm always really fascinated by, when you see these spaces in other parts of the world where animals and humans cohabitate more than they do, I think, here in the West. And it's really incredible. Sometimes obviously there are some horrific things that come out of that, with endangering both sides. But then sometimes you see like these really beautiful interactions. And it's, we do share the planet. And I think that's a beautiful message. Look at James Cameron getting me talking all kumbaya. But I did think that introducing a new natural resource beyond unobtainium, which we never found out what it did, well, we find out what this does, and this is, I think, a very interesting idea. So again, it's a part of a whale that can only be harvested by killing the whale. And what does this thing do? It stops human aging. I was like, has anyone here used it? Because, I don't think so. I mean, I would love it if in the movie they'd said, I'm actually like 200 years old. And I'd be like, give me some of that stuff. And so it's a literal fountain of youth. And that's, again, as I said, a really complex and interesting moral quandary to introduce to this franchise. Because that's far more of a gray area than actual whaling. Whaling today is used for some pharmaceuticals. It used to be used to make candles and stuff. And you're like, I can't believe we killed a whale for candles. It's so stupid. It's so horrible. But I think this is more of a gray area where it's the fountain of life. But also, why wasn't there more of a mad rush to harvest these whales? Why wouldn't they have been harvested to extinction immediately? Like, I didn't see any efforts to protect them. I guess it's hard to get to Pandora. Maybe that was it. But then also, if the company is in charge of this, I didn't see any attempts to breed these whales, which you would think they would be doing. But still, it was an interesting element to introduce, and it kept the environmental theme of the first movie while moving it to be specific to water. I'm like, what part of the Earth are we going to focus on with Avatar 3? So yeah, it was water specific, and again, it reminds you about how we share the planet with animals, and we need to respect them and live in harmony, and understand that they're not things, but living beings. I'll be curious to see how this new resource factors into Avatar 3. I hope so. Again, I think it's such a long movie that you're like, that's the Avatar 2, and sometimes you forget that it's really setting up a third film. The third film's definitely coming out. They shot it. What's in question is 4 and 5. All right, Titanic 2. It finally came true. Everybody always makes jokes about a Titanic sequel, and here it is. Because it was weird how much the third act looked like Titanic, complete with people traipsing around in these giant things of water in a ship that was sinking and turning at odd angles as it sunk. I was like, wow, this is incredible. We're right here. James Cameron, did you use the same VFX files? I mean, he had to build on them, obviously, because it's a lot more complex these days, but it was very similar. And also, you had people chasing each other around during that sinking, which created even more obstacles. And it's not just Jack and Rose. You have Neytiri and her youngest daughter, Jake and Loak, and then Spider also rescuing Quaritch. Although I think Quaritch was outside of the ship. And with the sinking ship, with Jake and Quaritch, as it was going down, they had it out. They were like, we're going to fight even though the ship is sinking. You're like, put a pin in it, guys. But it reminded me of Billy Zane losing it at the end of Titanic. And you're like, put a pin in it, Billy Zane. And I think it underscored again how much deep down Jake and Quaritch are alike. They have or at least have very, very strong similarities. That they both were like, that's right, let's just do this now. I'd be like, I'll see you later. Why don't you think about this and maybe we don't have to even do this, man. Quaritch's obsession with revenge against Jake also reminded me of Ahab, of course, with Moby Dick, complete with all the whaling stuff. You're my Moby Dick, man. If we'd spent more time with Neytiri, maybe her and her daughter being there at the end would have resonated more. Instead, it just reminded me of when she was trying to rescue Jake in that, that camper at the end of the first movie. I was like, oh, that looks just like that. Now, on that note, speaking of Neytiri and vendettas, I really liked that Quaritch, working from his last backup instead of the moment he was killed. That was hilarious. He just assumed that it was Jake Sully who took him out. But then when he finds his body and Neytiri's arrows, that was great. He discovers that it was Neytiri who actually killed him. And I didn't love, although I think it was very Quaritch, that he just decided that she was an extension of Jake. He was like, oh, it looks like Mrs. Sully did the deed, but that, Jake somehow ordered it. But I have hope for this showdown because I like that Quaritch said he and Neytiri still had a score to settle. And I hope in the third movie, Quaritch realizes that Neytiri is his opponent individually, all on her own, and they have a proper throwdown. My money's on Neytiri. But I do think they're trying to redeem Quaritch. But Stephen Lang has said he's the villain for all 4 movies. Remaining films? Let's see. All right, so let's talk about the characters. And I think Neytiri is actually a really good place to start. I was kind of hard on her character in my non-spoiler review, but when I was doing my notes for the spoiler review, I was like, oh, I actually see something here. So even though Neytiri takes a back seat in this movie, I feel that in and of itself is part of her story. She decides to listen to Jake, and she pays the price for it, many times over. First, her father's bow breaks, and kudos to James Cameron and Zoe Saldana for setting up that moment. I gasped out loud when she just glanced at her father's broken bow, and I felt that loss. And it was done so quickly, but they teed it up beautifully that I felt what she felt. It was incredible. I was like, stop listening to Jake, Neytiri. He doesn't know what he's doing. Then when trust yourself. Then when Kiri is having that episode and the human science can't save her, and I thought that was interesting to, say, I think they said she had epilepsy, but they were trying to put a human label on maybe something that wasn't human. So that was really interesting. But I love that Neytiri threw everyone out. And she was like, you tried, you didn't do anything. Now let, the Metkayina healer, which was, again, Kate Winslet, let her do her job. And it worked. I don't know if it worked. I mean, I don't know. I think you shouldn't knock human science for that other stuff. But maybe both things. Maybe it was, again, just like the Sully family, a beautiful combination of the two. You never know what's going to work. So that's why, I'm a big fan of trying everything in those very desperate situations. And then, of course, she loses her oldest son because Jake insists on running their family like a military unit, which she cautions him against earlier in the movie because her sons are trying to live up to his legacy, acting older and more experienced than they actually are. I hope for the third film that Neytiri takes back some control of her own life and her family because she proved in the first movie that she really knows what she's doing. And I like this depiction, though, because you see this happen in real life. A lot of women do this for their boyfriends and their husbands and sometimes for their children, where they second guess themselves and they let others take the lead and they kind of go into support mode. And so even though I don't know if James Cameron intended to do this, Neytiri's story is still very interesting and still very realistic. And I hope that women see this, or anybody in a relationship, and are like, yeah, don't do that. Quaritch, I love this version of the character. Love it. As I said in my non-spoiler review, it's often said that you need to walk in someone else's shoes to truly understand them. And here, Quaritch literally finds himself, in that great line, reincarnated in the body of his enemy. I think as he goes out into Pandora and starts to forge these connections, literally in some cases, I loved him getting his own Banshee and his competitiveness with Jake on how to do it. He was like, Sully just jumped on one and did it the right way. All right. I don't think, by the way, I recently rewatched Avatar. I don't think Spider gave him the correct instructions. I'm like, then pick the one that tries to kill you. I mean, he just seemed to be going after an Avatar. It worked out. I mean, a Banshee. It worked out. And I love that. I thought it was great. And then also his connection beyond the planet with his son. And I think as he makes these connections and he's no longer a solo act, his world becomes less black and white. Also, as a Na'vi, can he even leave Pandora now? I mean, this is now his home. It's not just a mission. And also, I'm curious as to whether or not he's company property. I wonder if they'll explore that in Avatar 3. I thought the flashback video, by the way, setting him up with the human Quaritch saying, looks like I got my ticket punched if you're watching this. I thought that was great. Giovanni Ribisi walked in briefly. It felt like a video before a ride load that sets up the experience. And so I really liked that. Speaking of grays, a complex villain is a lot more interesting than a cartoonish one, and finally Quaritch has some complexity. He also has a new lease on life. He's younger, in better shape than he or any human could ever be, and he has a new world, now not necessarily to defeat, but to harness, because as I said, this is his new home. So I think that's a subtle change, but it's a big one. I mean, I don't think Quaritch is ever going to become like an environmentalist, but he is someone who's self-serving, and he can't leave now, so he's going to be more invested in the survival of Pandora. He's not going to go back to Earth. I'm very excited to see Quaritch's journey in the upcoming movies. Again, as I said, I think that they're going to try and redeem him because he threatened to do a lot of killing this movie, but you'll notice he didn't actually do a lot of killing. So I think James Cameron is putting him on the redemption track, and I'm looking forward to it. Kiri is another really interesting character with a lot of potential. And a big question in this movie is who is her father? Speaking about fathers and sons, I guess this is a father-daughter situation, or mother-daughter, because she does see her mother. But first, apparently Dr. Augustine's avatar was pregnant and in stasis managed to still somehow give birth to Kiri. Almost like sometimes you hear of women giving birth to someone in a coma. So when Kiri connects to Awa, she's able to visit her mother. Remember, Dr. Augustine, before she died in the first movie, said she was connected to Awa. Did she upload to the planet's consciousness? Because remember, the planet was able to permanently take a human's conscience and put it permanently into an avatar. So Awa has that capability. Because, I guess there's a fine line. You're like, am I talking to uploaded consciousness or a memory, like Jake and Neytiri at the end? I would like some clarification on this. But anyway, before Dr. Augustine can answer Kiri's question as to who her father is, and she seems very surprised to even be asked that, she's pulled away. And part of me thinks that Kiri might be a clone. I think, a little bit like Why the Last Man. Where that doctor cloned herself, where Dr. Augustine decided to clone herself, and that's what happened. So we'll see if that's the answer. But yes, Kiri is connected to Awa, and there are lots of hints about that throughout the film. And in the third act, she finally is able to, harness those abilities, and she controls the plants underwater and some of the underwater animals to help save everybody. But she's just trying things out. So I'm very curious in the next movie when she's had some practice of what she'll be capable of doing. As I said, she's Pandora's first superhero. I also think her romance with Spider is an interesting development, similar to Jake and Neytiri in the first film. I don't know how biologically Kiri and Spider could ever be together, but with Quaritch now also in Na'vi, maybe he'll find a way to get Spider an avatar and transfer him over so everyone can be together. But aren't they some ways still all together right now? Remember, Jake and Neytiri's children are considered half-breeds. Is Kiri a half-breed? Could she maybe be with a human? Also, Jake and Neytiri's children are somewhat human themselves because of the DNA of an avatar. And they have some human habits, I would say, even in how they conduct themselves. Some of humanity's good and bad habits. So while Avatar is a lot about environmentalism, I feel it's also a little bit about humanity as well. And I hope that they explore that even more. James Cameron's like, I'm already 3 hours plus on my story here. I'm doing the best I can. Loak, again, Britton Dalton is so good in this movie, and I find it so weird that he hasn't done any publicity for the film. I haven't seen him on any red carpets, he isn't doing any interviews, and he's such a big part of why this movie works. He's the teen heartthrob of the movie, complete with a brief flirtation with the Metkayina princess, Rhea. Very brief, not really explored. But remember, Loak, he's a pretty good catch. His father is from a star, and his mother is the princess of her own tribe. I didn't totally get his connection with that whale, except for the fact they both were outcast and I think kind of responsible for family members' deaths. But his performance is very charismatic, and I think also as a character he has an interesting look. I thought he had a cool look, so he really helps ground and hold your attention in the Sully family parts of the movie. You would think spending so much time with the Sully kids instead of Jake and Neytiri would be a letdown, but Cameron cast them so well that it really is great spending time with them. They're great characters. It's a little bit like the Goonies Avatar style, right? Jake Sully and Sam Worthington continues to be just this huge blank spot in the middle of this amazing canvas. As I said, the character is meant to be great, is technically great, but really not that great. I thought that the animation on him, though, this time around was so good that it kind of leveled up the performance anyway. And I felt very bad when he and Neytiri were able to visit their dead son at the end of the movie by connecting to the memories of the planet via Awa and to see him again. But I don't know how healthy that is. Who would want to wake up from a dream considering the harsh reality that awaits you? And are they going to talk about addiction maybe in the next virtual reality in Avatar 3? Well, maybe. They're setting that up as a potential storyline. As for the Metkayina, to me, one of the most interesting things about this tribe was how they'd evolved differently from the Na'vi, who were tree people. Because, of course, humans have evolved differently with skin tone and other cosmetic variations, right, on planet Earth. We're all mixed up now, okay? But, we do reflect the places at the corners of the globe and the environments that we came from. Our ancestors did. But to think of such big differences like we see here, beyond just skin color, which is also a variation, but wider and flatter hands and tails that are like fins to aid with going underwater, that's fascinating. I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, let's see, what other environments could we visit? How would those aliens differ? I also like the tribal dynamics and learning about their home from their charming dwellings on the water. I was like, these are some nice, they look like, when you go to a fancy, upscale resort and they have those little things on the water. I was like, it's like one of those. This is pretty nice. And then also the animals they interacted with on a far greater level than the Na'vi do with their banshees. Those banshees ain't writing any poetry. And then individually, though, there wasn't a lot going on here, despite some big name talent like Kate Winslet and Cliff Curtis. Their characters didn't really resonate. Although again, very well animated. But they didn't have a lot of time to develop these characters, and Kate Winslet talked about doing these things that we didn't see in this movie. So obviously she's talking about Avatar 3. So I guess they'll get more to do there. And of course, this tribe learned the classic lesson of just because something's happening over there doesn't mean it's not going to eventually come over here. So you better deal with it as early as you possibly can. So shout-outs. Finally, shout-outs to two very small cameos. Edie Falco is the new human commander in charge of Pandora, the new Quaritch. And Jermaine Clement is the new Dr. Augustine, this time a marine biologist. Very small roles, but both it's funny to see Jermaine Clement not being funny. He's great, though. He's so good. Very small roles, but both actors have so much personality and are so well known that they still make a big impression. Didn't you think it was funny that Edie Falco's character was drinking her coffee from a giant mug being held by the exoskeleton? I was like, why? I guess maybe not just so you don't break the habit of thinking of yourself through the extension of that exoskeleton, but it was silly. I thought it was silly. A little bit like the original Quaritch. I thought it was silly. But one can only hope they both have more to do in Avatar 3. And I would think, considering they have been cast in these roles, they do have more to do in Avatar 3. Technology. I did like those exoskeletons, though. I was like, I'd like one of those. And they were a little bit smoother and easier to use and better looking than the exoskeletons in the first Avatar movie. There are a lot of great toys in this movie. I thought they were awesome. And I think the world building is so flawless that you just immediately accepted it. You were like, yeah, this seems right. All right, let's go. Let's tell the story. Then let's wrap up our discussion with the 3D. I hope you got to see this movie in 3D. And if you didn't, I hope maybe you'll consider seeing it again in 3D, because you're really missing out if you haven't. I talked a lot about the 3D in my non-spoiler review and in my business, first evaluation, because I think it's really potentially another game changer for Hollywood. And it makes this movie more of an experience, like a theme park ride, which I think is, again, a very big deal for Hollywood, as they're trying to get you to go back to the theater. And I wanted to bring it up again here, though, because now you've seen the movie, and I'd be really curious to hear about your thoughts with the 3D experience. Because just like this movie, and this is actually quite clever, and I just realized this again when I was doing my notes for the spoiler review, I think the whole point of these movies is that you go to Pandora as well. So it was quite smart of James Cameron to set his story on a beautiful alien planet to really give you that journey. And I think that's so cool. And on that note, the first movie, everybody was like, ooh, Pandora at night is particularly cool. And this time, I really liked it too. I particularly liked the bioluminescent freckles on the Na'vi and the Metkayina. I thought they were really beautiful and so well realized in this film. It was so cool. I mean, humans love glitter, and this was like glitter. It was really great. It was a really nice, subtle touch, which I think really boosted the film. Oh, that's great. So that's my spoiler review of Avatar 2: The Way of Water. Again, are you now a believer? Are you an OG Avatar fan, or do you still think it's stupid? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.